A very good afternoon to everyone who is watching us live from across the globe. We are gathered here for this webinar on a decade of progress in the cancer supportive care with or reality. So, before we start the presentation, I'd like to introduce our moderator for the afternoon, Dr. Shashank Paikare, sir, Consultant Medical Oncology, Sri Pandya Hospital, Cuttack. Welcome, sir. Welcome to the webinar. And we also welcome our speaker for the afternoon, Dr. Prashant Kumar Parida, Assistant Professor, Department of Medical Oncology, PHPGIC, Cuttack. Welcome, sir. Welcome.
Thank you.
Without much delay, sir, we would like you to start the presentation. Sir. So over to you, sir.
Ashish, please share my screen. Good afternoon, everyone. So today we'll discuss about supportive care. And today's topic of discussion is the decade of progress in cancer supportive care, myth or reality. So over the last 1 or 2 decades, lots of developments has occurred over in the field of oncology, especially in the field of medical oncology, as well as supportive care. So that leads to improvement in overall survival as well as improvement in quality of life. Over the last 20 years, cancer treatment, before 20 years, the treatment primarily based on histology, location and size of the tumors as well as very few biomarkers. And at that time, roughly 200 lesser treatment options. Then today we have a lot of options today like chemotherapy, therapies, hormonal therapies. So now these therapies have improved survival a lot over the last 20 years. And 20 years ago, only 3 basic treatment modalities were there, like surgery, chemotherapy, and radiotherapy. And at that time, only limited supportive care options. So, if you can see in this graph, the mortality over the last 20 years has decreased, and survival curve has improved. And this is possible because of improvement in diagnostic technology, so that we are now able to diagnose most of the malignancy early, improvement in therapeutic options, as well as improvement in supportive care options. So that also leads to improvement in quality of life. These are the progresses by many measures. Among the therapeutic options, including radiation and preventive therapies, including vaccines, has been added. Vaccine, cervical cancer, improvement in quality of life. And now we are able to manage better toxic aspect of chemotherapy as well as radiotherapy. So there is a improvement in survival rate. Late effects have been identified, and surveillance strategies also has been better established.
Excuse me, sir. Sir, we'll just mute our audios and videos. Like Sushant sir and I, we both will mute our audios. The sound is, I think, echoing in the background.
Yes. The sound is echoing. So
yes, sir. Sir, can you mute your audio?
Yeah. I will mute my audio.
Yes, sir. Yes. I'll also mute my audio as well. Sir, can you speak right
now? Okay. Now the sound is okay. Okay. Thank you. So if we consider the top 5 advances in modern oncology over the last 20 years, 20 to 30 years, in 1965, chemotherapy initially used for advanced Hodgkin's lymphoma, and this is a disease where cure is possible. And in 2006, cervical vaccine, now we have 2 vaccines has been approved. One is quadrivalent, one other is divalent vaccines approved for prevention of cervical cancer. In 2001, the targeted therapy imatinib initially approved in chronic myeloid leukemia, and 1977 with chemotherapy for germ cell tumor of testis, cure is possible with chemotherapy only. So in 1991, because we all know that chemotherapy, cytotoxic chemotherapy has been associated with a lot of side effects. One of them important side effect is nausea and vomiting. So in 1991, powerful anti-nausea drugs control major side effects of this cancer treatment. So these are the advances. In the field of supportive care and palliative care, several therapies as well as options has been added over the last 1 or 2 decades. Newer therapies greatly reduced the treatment side effects, chemotherapy toxicity or radiotherapy associated toxicities. Shift in approach and philosophy also that improves quality of life, and now this quality of life is a central focus of each oncologist work. So if you can see filgrastim, which is a myeloid growth factor used for neutropenia or febrile neutropenia associated with chemotherapy or radiotherapy. As we know that chemotherapy associated febrile neutropenia or neutropenia has a grave outcome, and lot of mortalities initially occurred with this due to this febrile neutropenia. So this filgrastim or pegfilgrastim has been approved, and they have prevented lot of morbidities or deaths due to this febrile neutropenia. Pain management, which is very important, and it is a core quality measure in management of malignancies and also terminally ill patients. So early palliation. So this palliative care and supportive care, they go hand in hand, and early palliation helps in patients' life better with good quality of life. Literally, this supportive care is in cancer is the prevention and management of adverse effect of cancer and its treatment or management. And this includes management of physical, psychological symptoms and side effects across the continuum of cancer. If you will consider, it is just like an experience from the diagnosis through the continuum or anti-cancer treatment till the post-treatment care. So all these things include this supportive care, and it also includes rehabilitation, secondary cancer prevention, survivorship, and end-of-life care or palliative care. All these are integral part of supportive care. And what are the benefits of this supportive care? It alleviates symptoms and complications, reduces or prevents toxicity associated with treatment, whether it is chemotherapy or radiotherapy or surgery, and supports communication with the patient about their disease and prognosis of the disease, allow patient to tolerate better and benefit from active therapy more easily. That means it improves the compliance of the patient so that patient can complete the whole course of therapy due to the supportive care. And it also eases some emotional burden of patient and caregivers, also helps cancer survivor with psychological and social issues also. So these are the benefits of supportive care. The advantage of supportive care is it reduces the polypharmacy and lessen drug side effects, and it produces a pharmacoeconomic benefits because this financial constraint is always important, especially the countries like us. So it produces pharmacoeconomic benefits that improves as a whole quality of life. So for a better supportive care institute, at least these are the areas where this expertise should be available in order to provide adequate supportive care management. These are anemia, bleeding, neutropenia, febrile neutropenia, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. Nutritional support is also important. Pain management, some obstructive syndromes, malignant effusions, pleural effusion, peritoneal effusion, oral mucositis, stomach care, skeletal metastasis, thromboembolism, psychosocial and ethical issues, sexual functions, and palliative care. So for better management or supportive care, this expertise should be available in order to provide a better adequate supportive care. So we'll discuss few of them important supportive care areas. The first one is febrile neutropenia and neutropenia. So what is febrile neutropenia or neutropenia? This neutropenia is associated with chemotherapy or radiotherapy, where the white blood cell count or WBC, mainly neutrophil count decreases, because this white blood cell count, they act as a prevention or protective for prevention of infection in our body. So when there is neutropenia occurs, there is a increased risk for infection and complicated life-threatening infection, hospitalization. So whenever we are using myelosuppressive chemotherapy or cytotoxic chemotherapy, neutropenia may occur due to myelosuppression that may lead to infection, and febrile neutropenia leading to complicated life-threatening events, prolonged hospitalization. So that delay the chemotherapeutic or dose intensity, thereby reducing survival. So for better outcome, we should have a better adequate management for febrile neutropenia or neutropenia. So this is NCCN guideline for management of neutropenia. Evaluation of each patient for risk for development of febrile neutropenia or neutropenia associated with each chemotherapy, especially with solid tumors and non-myeloid malignancies. And after risk assessment, if someone is taking high dose therapy or dose dense therapy, they are more likely to develop neutropenia or febrile neutropenia. Several patient risk factors, including comorbidities, old age, poor performance status, that also aggravates the development of febrile neutropenia. And treatment intent is also important. Whenever we are treating in a palliative intent, we can reduce the dose. For curative intent treatment patients, maintenance of dose intensity is important, so that we should prophylactically advise myeloid growth factors. So according to guidelines or NCCN guideline, if the risk for development of neutropenia is more than 20%, then granulocyte colony stimulating factors or myeloid growth factor, GCSF, should be given prophylactically to prevent the further or future neutropenia or febrile neutropenia. And for intermediate risk patient, where the risk is 10 to 20%, other patient risk factors should be considered, whether this patient, whether a myeloid growth factor is required or not. And if it is low, less than 10%, usually growth factor or GCSF is not recommended. So these are some of the factors or patient-related factors where primary prophylaxis with GCSF is often appropriate, even with regimen with risk factor or febrile neutropenia risk less than 20%. These are elderly, more than 65 years, poor performance status, and previous history of developing febrile neutropenia, poor nutritional status, and any active infection or wound, more advanced cancer, extensive prior treatment, administrative or combined chemoradiotherapy, that also increases chance of developing febrile neutropenia, cytopenia due to bone marrow involvement. So these are the and other serious comorbidities where even if the risk is less than 20%, but we should consider prophylactic GCSF or growth factor. So you can see in this graph, risk of febrile neutropenia increases with the duration of severe neutropenia also. As the days of neutropenia increases, chance of predicted probability of febrile neutropenia also increases. So then how to manage or strategies for management of this chemotherapy induced neutropenia? Prevention is always better. Chemotherapy dose reduction or delay, especially possible, especially in palliative care setup. Myeloid growth factor like filgrastim, lenograstim, pegfilgrastim, and should be given if the risk is high. Antibiotics whenever you are suspecting infection or febrile neutropenia should be given. And treatment observation is always observation is recommended if patient is febrile neutropenia. In that case, growth factor not recommended, and antibiotics, myeloid growth factor, though limited benefit in those cases. So this is the ESMO guideline. If temperature more than 38.3 degree and absolute neutrophil count less than 500, prompt assessment, vigorous resuscitation if needed. Then calculation of MASCC score, that is Multinational Association of Supportive Care in Cancer score. So if the MASCC score is high, then these patients are more likely to develop febrile neutropenia. So in that case, inpatient broad spectrum intravenous antibiotic therapy along with growth factor should be given. If low risk, then inpatient or oral antibacterial therapy for some cases can be advised. So this is the MASCC score, febrile neutropenia risk score. There are several factors has been taken into account: burden of illness, moderate symptom, no or mild symptoms, severe symptoms, hypotension, chronic obstructive disease. So several factors has been taken and scores has been given, and patients with scores more than 21 are at low risk for complications, and if less than that, then these are called high risk and they should be treated with IV antibiotics after hospitalization. The same thing, if febrile neutropenia risk more than 20%, prophylactic growth factor, less than 10 to 20%, that means intermediate risk, assess factors, other patient factors, and if any other comorbidities or poor performance status, you can start growth factor. If less than 10% risk, then you can safely avoid growth factor also. These are the evidence from different guidelines, key recommendation, URTC, ASCO, NCCN, all of them, they have recommended GCSF or filgrastim or growth factor, myeloid growth factor as primary prophylaxis with more than 20% overall febrile neutropenia risk, associated with chemotherapy, febrile neutropenia, considered patient risk factor for overall febrile neutropenia risk, and primary prophylaxis to maintain the chemotherapy dose intensity or dose dense chemotherapy, or GCSF they have recommended for ongoing febrile neutropenia episode, and GCSF formulation and dosing also. Secondary prophylaxis, if someone has developed previous febrile neutropenia previously, secondary prophylaxis are also recommended. Next is anemia. Anemia is very common, especially with cytotoxic chemotherapies and some of the targeted therapies. And anemia most commonly occurs in patients receiving chemotherapy. If you can see, almost 75% of patients they develop anemia on chemotherapy, and on chemo radiation combination 72%, and RT almost 38%. So patients taking cytotoxic chemotherapy, they are more likely to develop anemia, and it has been seen that if someone maintains normal hemoglobin during her treatment, his or her treatment period, and that means he has better quality of life. So higher hemoglobin is associated with higher health-related quality of life. And according to guideline, NCCN guideline for chemotherapy-induced anemia in patients with cancer, if he is asymptomatic without significant comorbidities, then you can observe and periodic reevaluate for development of anemia. If high risk, especially progressive decline in hemoglobin, or recent intensive chemotherapy or radiation, or asymptomatic with comorbidity like cardiac, COPD, cerebrovascular accident, in that case, you should consider for blood transfusion or RBC transfusion according to American Blood Bank Association of Blood Bank guideline. And if symptomatic patients for anemia, due to anemia like tachycardia, tachypnea, chest pain, syncope, fatigue, in that case, transfusion is advisable. So, though transfusion has advantage of early or rapid improvement in hemoglobin level, but it has been associated a lot of toxicities, or some of them are early toxicity. But most importantly, some blood-borne infection like viral, bacterial infection, parasite infection, increased tumor recurrence has been seen some trials from perioperative transfusion, worsened cancer prognosis from perioperative transfusion. So these are the toxicities or side effects of transfusion is there. So those are asymptomatic patients. In that case, now erythropoietin stimulating agents they can be advisable, and 3 of them has been approved: epoetin alpha, darbepoetin alpha, and epoetin beta. Though they have difference in pharmacodynamic profile, and efficacy safety is almost similar in all 3. So it can be used in chemotherapy induced anemia in asymptomatic patients. So for special categories, considering this ESA use or erythropoietic stimulation agent use, cancer with chronic kidney disease, moderate to severe, consider erythropoietin stimulated by FDA dosing or adjustment. Patient undergoing palliative treatment, you can give either ESA or RBC transfusion, and patient those who refuse, consider ESA or instead of a transfusion. But someone is we are treating in a curative intent, then this ESA usually we should avoid, because there is not enough evidence to support ESA use in this patient population. So rescue by transfusion versus an improvement or maintenance strategy with ESA. This is a conceptual model. You can see asymptomatic patients, you can use ESA improvement on the maintenance strategy, but for individualized patient trigger, transfusion is a better option. Then chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting, and this is very important because almost most of the cytotoxic chemotherapy agents, they has been associated with nausea and vomiting. Almost 70 to 80% patients, cancer patients, experience this chemotherapy-induced nausea vomiting. Prophylaxis is the most effective method of managing this CINV, and though this nausea and vomiting can significantly affect quality of life, like fatigue, treatment adherence, day of work, etc. So this should be important to prevent nausea and vomiting during treatment. Pathophysiology, lot of receptors has been seen in central nervous system, like vomiting center or chemoreceptor trigger zone, and that is H1, M1, neurokinin 1 inhibitor, 5-HT3 inhibitors, receptors. They has been explained in CNS as well as in peripheral system, that is GI or vestibular system. Several mechanoreceptor or chemoreceptor has been expressed, and the pathophysiology behind this is stimulation of this receptor leads to chemoreceptor nausea and vomiting. There are several patient risk factors associated with the increased risk of developing CINV. Usually women age less than 50 years, history of alcohol use, history of vomiting with prior exposure. These are the factors associated with the increased risk of developing nausea and vomiting. Other risk factors like history of motion sickness, nausea or vomiting in pregnancy, and sometimes this nausea and vomiting may not be associated with chemotherapy or radiotherapy. So we have to exclude other factors like brain metastasis, electrolyte disturbance, gastroparesis, concurrent medication, bowel obstruction, vestibular dysfunction. So these factors should be excluded before treating chemotherapy-induced nausea vomiting. This type classification of nausea vomiting may be acute, delayed, anticipatory, or breakthrough. Acute usually minutes to hours after drug administration, peaks after 6 hours, but usually resolves within 24 hours. Delayed more than 24 hours, usually affected imetogenic drugs like cisplatin, carboplatin, cyclophosphamide, or doxorubicin. Anticipatory, it is just like the previous experience of the drug, that incidence is 18 to 57%, and it is due to a condition reflex. So whenever a patient goes to hospital environment, or whenever he sees the IV set or hospital, there is a chance of development of this nausea and vomiting. So these are called anticipatory. Breakthrough, that means vomiting that occurs despite adequate antiemetic therapy, and refractory means that occurs despite treatment and rescue antiemetic use. Hematogenic potential of chemotherapy, highly hematogenic risk more than 90%, moderate 30 to 90%, low risk 10 to 30%, and minimal less than. So according to the risk, chemotherapy drugs, you can see these are the hematogenic potential drugs: carmostine, cisplatin, cyclophosphamide, dacarbazine, dacnamcycline, fluorethamine. These are the drugs with high hematogenic potential, and some of them are moderate, low, and minimal risk of developing nausea and vomiting. Several classes of antiemetic drugs like 5-HT3 receptor antagonist. We have now palonsetron, granisetron, ondansetron, dolasetron, and dexamethasone or corticosteroid is an important antiemetic therapy also. And recently, this neurokinin 1 receptor antagonist like aprepitant, fosapretant, and now this combination netopretant, palonsetron has been approved for use as a preventive therapy, and these are highly effective with few side effects and safe in combination also. So the palonsetron is a second generation 5-HT3 antagonist with strong receptor binding appetin 3, and it extended half-life comparable to tolerability and ease of use, and it has a superiority in comparison to other 5-HT3 like granisetron, ondansetron, and in delayed chemotherapy induced nausea vomiting, favors palonsetron as the preferred 5-HT3 antagonist. And this aprepitant is a NK1 receptor inhibitor or antagonist. It has been approved in oral or IV formulation. Sometimes breakthrough medication for CINV, you can consider several classes has been approved either in alone in combination, antipsychotics like olanzapine, cannabinoids, benzodiazepines, phenothiazines, dopamine receptor antagonists like metoclopramide. So these are the drugs you can use in breakthrough, and in combination, if those are high risk for MSS, 5-HT3 receptor antagonists like palonsetron day 1, dexamethasone day 1 to 4, aprepitant you can use day 1 to 3, moderate. Similarly, 5-HT3 day 1, dexamethasone day 1, or no, you can use up to 2 to 3 days, or aprepitant day 1 to 3. For low risk, dexamethasone, metoclopramide, fluticasone, any one of them you can use for low risk chemotherapeutic agents. Venous thromboembolism, cancer itself causes some of the malignancy like pancreatic, gastric cancer, lung cancer. They causes a procoagulant state that can lead to thrombosis. Even some chemotherapeutic agents in combination like IMiDs plus dexamethasone, that they also increase thrombosis in cancer. So this cancer-associated thrombosis is common complications, high mortality among patients due to this VT or venous thromboembolism. It is the second leading cause of death in cancer patients. So activation of coagulant pathway, coagulation is more important for tumor progression and metastasis also. So cancer itself can increase the risk from thrombosis. So you can see in the graph, the risk of VT varies over during chemotherapy treatment or relapse, and you can see the natural history. As after diagnosis, the risk increases till hospitalization. So during hospitalization, the risk is highest, and after giving chemotherapy, the risk decreases. And on remission, the risk is almost nil, but with relapse or metastasis, the risk again increases. So these are the risk factors. Some of them are patient-related, like old age, race, prior VT, platelet count, comorbidity condition, cancer-related, like primary site, and like prostate, lungs, gastric. These cancers are more likely to develop VT, metastatic disease, treatment-related, major surgery, chemotherapy, hormonal agents, ESA, anti-angiogenin therapy. So these are the factors which increases the risk of venous thromboembolism. These are the consequences: increased morbidities, increased mortality, risk of recurrent VT, bleeding complications. So that leads to increased healthcare cost also. So how to assess the risk? This is a Khorana predictive model for chemotherapy associated VTD. For outpatient management, you can see the risk according to site of primary cancer, pre-chemotherapy, platelet count, hemoglobin level, and if the risk score is 0, low risk, and the risk of developing VT is up to 1.5%, and if it is high, 3 or higher, 6.7 to almost 13%. So same thing, the VT prediction risk score, and management VT prophylaxis following discharge for ambulatory patients. If surgical oncology patients, outpatient of hospital, primary VT prophylaxis is recommended for up to 4 weeks post-treatment for high-risk abdominal or pelvic surgery patients. For medical oncology, those who are taking chemotherapy or targeted therapy, especially multiple myeloma patients, those who who are taking immunomodulated drug like thalidomide, lenalidomide, or pomalidomide, they are the highest risk. If they are taking steroid along with these IMIDs, they are the highest risk. Other cancer patients, this VT risk should be calculated based upon this Khorana score, and intermediate or high risk for VT Khorana score more than 2, consider an oral anticoagulant prophylaxis for up to 6 months, like apixaban or rivaroxaban. No routine VT prophylaxis is recommended for patients score less than 2. ASCO guidelines: surgical patient prophylaxis with low molecular weight heparin or low dose unfractionated heparin with or without mechanical methods up to 4 weeks for patients with high risk feature. Hospitalized patients, medical patients should be considered anticoagulant prophylaxis in the absence of any contraindication. For ambulatory patients, routinely not recommended, but for patients those like multiple myeloma, IMIDs or steroid should be given. So this is VT risk assessment for multiple myeloma, and those who are on IMIDs, high risk, more than 3 points, anticoagulant recommended, low molecular heparin like enoxaparin, dalteparin or warfarin you can give, and low risk aspirin 81 to 325 milligram daily will be sufficient. So these are the anticoagulant prophylaxis when compared with placebo. These enoxaparin, dalteparin, fondaparin, and high risk hospitalized medical patients. Recommendation: ASCO recommended VT prophylaxis in hospitalized patients with cancer if there is no contraindication. So all hospitalized patients with cancer should have a VT prophylaxis with anticoagulants. Ambulatory patients with cancer, myeloma patient receive thalidomide or IMID with steroid should be given, otherwise no routine prophylaxis. Patients are undergoing cancer surgery, prophylaxis low dose unfractionated heparin or low molecular weight heparin given. For recurrent, you can cancer patient low molecular preferred approach for initial 5 to 10 days, and 6 months is also preferable.
So I think sir's mic is on again.
Yeah.
Okay. So mucositis, oral mucositis is one of the important complications seen in radiotherapy, chemotherapy, some immunotherapies also. So it is the inflammation and ulceration of affected mucosal membranes, most often non-keratin mucosa is affected because these are mucosal epithelial lining are rapidly dividing cells, so they are affected, and these are very painful. It feels like you are swallowing razors, and occur about 5 to 7 days after chemotherapy because the cell turnover is 7 to 14 days and resolves completely in 1 to 3 weeks. Happen most often with antimetabolites, methotrexate, cytarabine, or anti-tumor antibiotics, and they present with severe pain, often requiring opioids, decreased ability to eat, speak, swallow. And treatment is only palliative and preventive. So better to have a time gap. If someone is taking chemotherapy, radiotherapy, there should be sufficient gap between chemotherapy and radiotherapy. So to prevent this mucositis, or chlorhexidine rinse can be used, or avoid alcohol rinses like Listerine because that aggravates. Cryotherapy like ice chips in mouth during treatment sometimes helpful. And the important therapy has been approved over the last decade is palifermin. It is a keratinocyte growth factor resulting in proliferative epithelial tissue, and it prevents helps in rapid healing of this epithelial mucous membrane. So that can be an option also. These are the home remedies you can to prevent this mucositis. Drink plenty of water, honey, aloe vera, salt water rinses, baking soda or salt water rinse. Avoid very hot, sugary or spicy foods. Xerostomia, this due to dryness of mouth. It can occur due to chemotherapy or radiotherapy, and other effects like lower salivary pH, decreased salivary IgA, altered sense or taste sensation can occur due to xerostomia. We have a drug like amipostine that can used as a preventive therapy. Pilocarpine stimulates salivary flow, cholinergic side effect it has. You can use them for natural saliva can be achieved by stimulation with chewing gum, sucking ointment, sugarless candies, menthol, vitamin C, lozenges. So that increases natural saliva flow. Lower GI complication like diarrhea is also important, sometimes due to cancer itself or often due to drug like 5-FU, cytarabine, irinotecan. Irinotecan causes severe diarrhea and other cholinergic symptoms. If it is early, within 24 hours of irinotecan, then you should give atropine. If more than 24 hours, drugs like loperamide should be used. Pain is very important, not only during the terminal ill patients or palliative care patients. It sometimes helps in patients during cancer treatment also. This is the pain ladder. Step 1, if you can use non-opioid analgesic like NSAIDs. Step 2, weak opioids. And step 3, as the patient increases, strong opioids like morphine, methadone, or transdermal pads can be used. And if highest level of pain, neural blocks, epidural can be used. Other methods for prevention are in for pain like radiotherapy and for bone metastasis or pleural involvement, psychosocial counseling, cognitive behavioral therapy also improves relief in pain management. Alternative therapy, although they are like acupuncture, meditation, they can be used. Psychosocial problem, very important. Coping, distress, and support are crucial psychosocial issues that need to be discussed with the patient and their caregivers. And coping with a serious medical illness can be very challenging for a patient, and common reaction at various stages illness like shock. At the time of diagnosis, a patient can have shock, emotional numbness, disbelief, and denial or anger. During advanced stage, fear, sadness, guilt, or terminal ill patients, regret, hopelessness, helplessness. These are the psychosocial problem patient and their caregivers can face. And stage-specific coping challenges. So acute treatment for initial routes invite involvement survivors programs and in a relapse, clear communication to provide care. So these are the options for coping challenges during this treatment for psychosocial issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. It was such an informative session. And before we go to the end of this webinar, sir, we would like our moderator, sir, to ask a few questions and share a bit more knowledge. Sir, over to you, sir. So you can click. So you have disabled your audio, sir. You can enable your audio and then speak.
Hello.
Yeah. It's audible.
Yes.
Yeah, audible.
Yes, sir. It's audible.
I prefer that first. I thank you to Dr. Prashant Parida for the nice presentation and discussing almost all topics in supportive care, and it is very nice to hearing that this type of presentation. My question that how a common people that know he has febrile neutropenia, what steps he has taken that for the febrile neutropenia so that he can identify and report to the doctors, the treating physician.
So the question is febrile neutropenia.
Yeah.
So So this febrile neutropenia and neutropenia, those patients taking chemotherapy or sometimes radiotherapy to pelvis or flat bone areas, they are more likely to develop neutropenia, and there is a term called absolute neutrophil count. If absolute neutrophil count is more than 1500, that is considered as normal. We call it as new, and based upon the grades, if it is 1000 to 1500, it is grade 1, 500 to 1000 grade 2, less than 500 to 100 grade 3, and less than 100 it is grade 4. So especially those patients taking chemotherapy or radiotherapy, they are developing a fever along with neutropenia. They can think probably this is a case of febrile neutropenia, so they should consult their physician or treating physician whether they are having any is a case of low risk febrile neutropenia, so that they can be managed at home, or they are high risk febrile neutropenia case, so they should be hospitalized and treated.
Yes, sir. Can we have any the next question, sir?
Hello. My next
Yes,
question. Hello. My next question was a lot of patients have faces that in spite of many things have refractory, that is the resistant type of nausea vomiting. And what advice you give that patient so that they will take proper precaution for that to prevent vomiting?
So nausea and vomiting. Nausea vomiting, they are important. Not only chemotherapy, radiotherapy, and so there are several factors. Again, we have to exclude this like brain metastasis, obstructive symptoms, metabolic syndromes, electrolyte disturbance like calcium, sodium, or sodium. So they thinking that this is chemotherapy. Now we are able to because more content, anti-emetic, like palonsetron, the second generation and third generation 5-HT3 receptor antagonist, and NK1 receptor antagonist like aprepitant, fosaprepitant, and even combinations, the netopitant plus palonsetron fixed dose combination. So these drugs, they have almost they reduce the nausea and vomiting incidence very much over the last 5 to 10 years. And if someone is having refractory vomiting, nausea and vomiting, other drugs like antipsychotic olanzapine or benzodiazepine or cannabinoids, so can be helpful for refractory vomiting. They can advised those having refractory, and a dietary factor that should be also taken care of during refractory.
So for that, we should for the things I should simplify the things before labeling chemotherapy induced nausea vomiting. We should rule out all the factors what told by Dr. Prashant. Like we should take the other factors like electrolyte imbalance, or there is obstetric problems, or there is brain mets. We should rule out about that case. This should not be there. And we should introduce many things that is like benzodiazepines and other NK1 antagonist. We should add and we should modify the drugs also. Next was that the febrile neutropenia or that nausea vomiting. It was easily identified by patient. But how can he identify the that is deep vein thrombosis? How he know the patient having deep vein thrombosis?
So deep vein thrombosis is very important. It may be because we have seen malignancy itself. It is a procoagulant state. Some of the malignancies like pancreas, lungs, stomach, breast, they are more likely to or high risk for developing deep vein thrombosis. And some medications like what we are discussing, the IMID, lenalidomide, pomalidomide, thalidomide, in addition to especially steroid like Dexona, the risk for VT is very high, venous thromboembolism. And usually these VT patients, they present with pain, swelling, tenderness, and difficult to move her limb or his limb. And most of the time they present with thrombosis of lower limb or upper limb. So they can identify deep vein thrombosis, have pain, swelling, tenderness, and movement of the.
So we should advise the patient that if you have unilateral pain of the limb, any limb, there is unilateral asymmetrical pain over the limbs. So we should rule out the deep vein thrombosis by doing Doppler, that is ultrasound, so that we can see that there is venous thrombosis. Thank you. And another that for the mucositis part, and some patient that is very much distance from us to come to here for this diarrhea. So what advice, what precautions will told to the patient to prevent that diarrhea part, and all may take some precautions at the home-based treatment. Any home-based treatment for diarrhea?
For diarrhea, some of the drugs like 5-FU, irinotecan, they are associated with the diarrhea. As we have already discussed, for irinotecan, if the diarrhea is early onset, we should advise atropine. If it is delayed, then drugs like loperamide should be used to prevent the irinotecan induced diarrhea. And for management of other drugs like 5-FU, dietary factors, fluid intake, and some other supportive drugs like probiotic, prebiotic, and before thinking of it is due to chemotherapy, some infection-related diarrhea can occur, especially those who are those patients have mucositis. They are more likely to have diarrhea also. So we have to exclude the infective diarrhea also, and if possible, if due to infective diarrhea, antibiotic should be advisable. Otherwise, we can manage with these drugs.
So your microphone isn't on. So your microphone is.
Some chemotherapy drug very much pain, and what drug we should advise, or what precaution we should advise to take for the patient want to take that medication to prevent the pain, or during pain, what are the drugs we advise?
Pain, especially drugs like paclitaxel, docetaxel, with lots of myalgia. Then low backache. So even growth factor is also myeloid growth factors sometimes associated with back pain. For mild pain, we use NSAIDs, and for mild moderate pain, someone can use opioids like either tramadol, paracetamol combination, or if someone has a severe pain, then opioid drugs like methadone, morphine, transdermal patches like fentanyl or buprenorphine can be used. For highest level or severe pain, neural block the option also can be used.
Audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Hello.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
I am asking about nutrition. That is there is many myths about nutrition during or if cancers happen detected. So many told that don't take a lot of sugar, don't take non-veg, many things they told. Don't take milk, this type of things. So how we advise to the people's what is the proper nutrition for the cancer patient or during chemotherapy?
So nutritional factor is very important, especially those who are taking chemotherapy. This maintenance of good nutritional support is very important. Complete the course of chemotherapy, because poor nutrition is associated with many complications and also reduced to lots of morbidity is chemotherapy. It has been seen that the digestive capacity so that they can easily digest, and during chemotherapy high protein diet is advisable, so that patients, those who are taking chemotherapy, because some patients usually some patients like those who are having cancer cachexia, hello, yes.
Sir, your microphone isn't on again.
Yeah. Next is psychosocial issues in cancer patient. And is it necessary to send all the patient for the psychosocial counseling before starting, or at the diagnosis of cancer, the diagnosis or the before the starting chemotherapy, psychosocial counseling we need any support from psychologist?
Psychosocial issue, especially those malignant, because someone, if you will directly, when he or she will be diagnosed with a cancer or terminally cancer, when you will disclose the prognosis in front of a patient or caregiver, they sometimes will be in shock or emotional, almost in a depression stage. So in that case, proper counseling is very important. A patient should be counseled by a counselor, and emotional support, family support, emotional support, and this is very important. And a psychological counseling, even psychologist, because some patients, like I have seen some patients taking chemotherapy, they develop depression, even major depression. So needs some psychosocial support, even counseling by a psychologist also.
Sir, I think we can take one more question based on time. One more question we can take, sir.
That is another thing is that during chemotherapy, patient suffers and feels lot of fatigue. Is physiotherapy necessary for this patient? The cancer taking chemotherapy.
Cancer associated fatigue is an important topic. So most of the patients who are taking chemotherapy, immunotherapy, they usually develop fatigue. So it has been seen that those who are active or maintaining their activity, they are developing less fatigue. So and physiotherapy is also important. Activity, yoga, and relaxation technique. So these are the factors. These are very important of preventing this toxicity like that.
Thank you so much, sir. Like our time permits us to take that much questions for the time being, sir. Sir, I would like to you to turn off your mic, sir, because it's getting echoed. Thank you so much, sir. And thank you to everyone who has
Thank you, Ashish, for conducting this type of session. Thank you, Prashant sir, and nice presentation and nice talk. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So before we end this webinar, I would like to tell everyone that on the right hand side of the chat box, everyone can see the new user to International Association of Oncology can follow the steps to get the certificates. At the same time, sir, could you turn your mic off?
Yeah.
So at the same time, everyone who has registered for the webinar will receive an email in which they will be having links for downloading the certificates, and the feedback links you will also be receiving. So nobody needs to panic after we end this webinar. Everyone will be receiving the certificates as well as the feedback forms as well. So nobody needs to panic. So before we end this, I would like to thank I'd like to thank again to Dr. Sushant Paikre sir for a beautiful moderation, and Dr. Prashant Parida sir for the beautiful presentation. It was indeed such a knowledgeable and such an informative session. I think everyone must have learned a lot from this. So till the next time, we assure that we will be coming up with such informative sessions every week. And till the next time, I would urge everyone to stay home and stay safe during this pandemic time. And once again, thank you, Sushant sir. Thank you, Prashant sir, for these beautiful sessions. And we hope to see you soon again this webinar, sir. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone again.